Welcome back. Hi there. Today we're going to revise the second part of how to tackle paper one of the history IGCSE. In the last video we saw the main features of this paper. Today we're going to see how to tackle properly each task with some examples. So going very quickly through the main things that we mentioned on the last video. For this paper, we have only 2 hours and we have two sections, section A and B. On section A, you have to answer two questions based on the core content, and both questions have an ABC task. Section B, you choose the depth study you want to answer about, and you have to answer only one question. Of course, for each one you're doing more options, but you have to answer one question with an ABC task. All of these questions are something that you need to answer in total. If you choose to answer one, you have to answer A, B, and C of one. And if you choose to answer two, you have to answer A, B, and C of two. Every single A task is worth 4 points, B's 6, and C's 10. Remember that 1, 2, 3 questions of section A are based on the 19th century, and 5, 6, 7, and 8 are based on the 20th century. And then, of course, we have the depth studies. Remember that task A is always descriptive, B is always a bit more difficult because you have to analyze and give explanations, and C is a bit more difficult because it requires, of course, facts, explanations, and of course your own judgment too in the form of an essay. The most important thing is to respond to the command verb, always. So if you're asked to describe, you describe. If you're asked for the reasons why, you explain the reasons why. If you're asked for how far and an explanation of that how far, you explain both sides of the story, and then of course you add your own judgment. So they go rising in their level of complexity. But we will see that when we describe each task. So task A, an example of a task A could be this one. What were Germany's main losses under the Treaty of Versailles? So it's worth 4 points. And what I would recommend to do when you're starting practicing for this exam is create a thinking box for each question. Every single question is going to make you think, of course. But questions A are basically mentioning facts. So create a thinking box. Think about the clauses of the Treaty of Versailles, and then when you have all the clauses written down so you don't forget important ones, you think about how those clauses affected Germany and the fact that, of course, those clauses meant losing things. So a possible answer could be this one. War, guilt, reparations, German territories and colonies that they lost, Germany's armed forces that, of course, were reduced, and the League of Nations, that was created and Germany was not invited. Those are the clauses, main clauses, and in very general terms. But you don't need to lose a lot of time on thinking box. You need to earn time to answer these questions correctly, and maybe thinking about them first is actually going to make you win some time. Even though you have to think about it and you have to write them down, it usually saves a lot of time than when you're stuck in a question and thinking and you can make proper connections to answer it correctly. Maybe when you're used to practicing these exams, you won't be needing these thinking boxes anymore, but at the beginning, try to devote some time into them. So we have the clauses, and those clauses lead to consequences, of course. So connecting. War guilt made the Germans somehow very angry because they were humiliating and they had to accept the fact they started the war when in reality it wasn't necessarily them. But they had to accept it. And if they accept the war guilt, they have to pay reparations. Reparations that were not even stated on the Treaty of Versailles. They were given to the Germans years afterwards. And we are talking about millions of pounds. So of course, they weren't really happy. Plus, their country was pretty much economically destroyed after the First World War, and they had to pay millions of pounds in reparations. Yay for the Germans. German territories and colonies that were lost, they lost 10% of their lands, plus every single colony that they had abroad. And you know that colonies meant something for the countries at the time. They meant not only pride, but power and access to raw material that could lead to better industrialization. So it wasn't just a matter of pride, it was a matter of somehow making their economy work again. German armed forces were reduced, and that is a matter of pride, but not only pride, also security, because their army that had thousands of men due to basically conscription, but also the fact that Germany had been created as a militarized country. Um, well, their army was reduced to a laughing number of men, plus no armed vehicles, submarines, or aircraft. And don't forget that the German army had been very powerful at the start of, or at the beginning of the First World War due to their technology. They could only have 6 battleships, and the Rhineland, which was somehow a zone that protected them also, was militarized. And then they were not invited to the League of Nations. Talk about a punch in the gut. So, what could a possible answer of this question look like? Don't forget that this question is worth 4 points. So, my advice would be 4 facts. You will see that this answer has a bit more, but just because the person who answered could connect those facts. If you can connect them and make it short and sweet and not give a lot of detail, you go ahead and do it. But you don't need more than 4 facts. 4 points equals 4 facts. And the main things that Germany lost. Don't go describing all the details that I just did just because I wanted to give you a context, okay? You need to state only the main things. So, what were the things that Germany lost? Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany had to accept the blame for starting the First World War. 1 fact. And so, here we have a connection, pay reparations for the winning to the winning countries. You can either count that as 2 facts or you can count it as one, because you could make the connection. The Germans lost 10% of their land, including Alsace and Lorraine, which is a detail, by the way, but it's also stating in just 2 words, Alsace-Lorraine, that you know a bit more about the context. So even though this is a detail, if you want to add those very small words to the answer, it would give you some brownie points somehow. So including Alsace-Lorraine and its overseas colonies. So 1 fact, they lost a lot of land. But you're giving more into it. You need to be very tricky about this. What is more, they had to reduce their army to 100,000 men. I'm not going to mention all the rest. Why? Because I am already saying that they had to reduce the army. So if I mention all the details, I will go a bit overboard here. And Germany also had to militarize the Rhineland and lost all hope of being part of the newly created League of Nations. So I can either count this as 4 facts or I can count it as a bit more because I'm making connections and giving just very precise details. Anyway, this would be worth 4 points. So you have all the evidence highlighted here to prove that, of course, those points that you made are based on facts that you know. This would be a proper answer. The most important thing about a question or a task A on any of the questions, either it's core or depth study, would be don't go into details. It's not going to make your answer wrong, but it is going to make you lose a lot of time. And you don't want that because every task C is an essay question and every task B asks for explanations. So we want to devote more time for those points that are not only more complicated, but they are also worth more. So how do we tackle a task B? An example of a task B would be explain why Clemenceau and Lloyd George disagreed at the Paris Peace Conference about how to treat Germany. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about who Clemenceau and Lloyd George were because you should know it, and if not, you're probably going to study it. But I am going to use a thinking box again. So to this thinking box, I'm going to divide, in this thinking box, I'm going to divide Clemenceau's aims for Germany and Lloyd George's aims for Germany, because it's going to make it easier to compare and contrast those ideas and to get to a middle point of explaining why they disagreed at the Paris Peace Conference, because I'm not asked about Clemenceau's aims, Lloyd George's aims in particular. I'm asked for the reason why they disagreed, for which I will have to explain Clemenceau's aims and Lloyd George's, but not individually, but connecting them to show how they clashed, and therefore showing why they disagreed. So again, the command verb would be explain, and if you need to explain, you need to give your own reasons with your own words and your own ideas. You will need to support them with facts, but you need to explain it too. If you don't explain the facts and you just describe that moment in history, you're not going to be given full points for your answer. You need to explain it. Use your time to think about the reasons why, as they had different let's say, points of view of how to deal with Germany. Think about the reasons why that happened. That is what you need to write on your answer. So Clemenceau's aims for Germany were those. I'm not going to read them. You might stop the video and want to read them. And Lloyd George's aims for Germany were the ones that are stated here. Clearly, Clemenceau's aims were a bit more harsh on how to deal with Germany, which was justified from his point of view, and Lloyd George's aims were not as hard because it was justified from the British point of view, not to be too harsh on Germany. That's the main reason why they disagreed, okay? That's what you need to show using those facts with your own words, explaining. So a possible answer could be this one. I'm not going to read it all. I'm just going to go to the next slide and explain the structure. You might want to stop the video and read through it. This was taken from one of the versions of Modern World History of Van Walsh, one of the books that is usually used to study for the IGCSE exam. I changed it a bit, but basically the answer could be this one. So when you answer the big questions, we usually structure them with a very, very short introduction, like that one, and then 2 paragraphs, let's say the development of the answer. They're going to give the reasons why, with their explanation, of course. Without the explanation, again, the question is worth, or the answer is worth no points. So this is the first reason why, with an explanation. Paragraph 3 is the second reason why, with an explanation. And the fourth paragraph is a very short conclusion. 6 points. We usually give 3 points for one proper explanation and answer, and 6 points if you have 2 different points explaining the reasons why they disagreed and explaining them in detail, okay? So 2 reasons why they disagreed, each one with their explanation, and then a very short introduction and a very short conclusion. That's it. You don't need to write more than that. If you want to add a third reason why they disagreed, you go ahead and do it. It's not going to be wrong, but it is going to make you lose some time. So 2 reasons why, with their explanations, their details, their facts, and of course an introduction and a conclusion. Not more than that. And last but not least, actually is the most important point because it's worth 10, you have task C, which of course everybody loves because it's an, yeah, you guessed it, essay. The most important thing about these essays is that they're short, because you need to write 3 of those plus 3 task A and 3 B in just 2 hours. So it's a short essay that shouldn't take a very strong point of view. What do I mean by this? You need to create a balance. Every single one of the task C questions is a how far question. Cambridge does not want to see a strongly agree or a strongly disagree on anything. They want to know that you can check different points of view of a particular event in history and wonder about that balance. Okay? You need to create a balance. You might agree, you might disagree, Or maybe you have a middle point. You neither agree or disagree with whatever they're asking you to analyze. But you can never strongly disagree or strongly agree. Okay? You need to create a balance. So, the Treaty of Versailles was a fair settlement. That's the statement. You're usually given a statement, and then you're asked a question. How far do you agree with the statement? Explain your answer. If you don't explain, again, you have no answer. So, short introduction. Again, this was taken from Ben Walsh, Modern World History. One of the versions, actually, I think, is the version for 2013. Here in Argentina, the books arrive a bit late. So, short introduction. I have some issues with this introduction. I'll explain in a second. Second argument, third argument, and conclusion. Why do I have some issues with this short introduction? Because this short introduction has the first argument included into it. Usually, if you have an introduction, the introduction is just that, an introduction, 1-2 sentences, not more than that. Then you separate the first argument, second argument, third argument, and the conclusion, okay? But you can put it this way too. Cambridge is not going to be very, let's say, particular in those things. They would want to see that you complied to the basic needs for analyzing a historical event. They would want to check that you can contrast and compare and analyze and explain those things that you are asked as a historian. Structure is important because it clears your ideas and it shows somehow that, and it's really like this, that you have studied and that you know what you're talking about. Because when you find an answer that is all where all the ideas are mixed up, where there's no structure, where there are lots of mistakes, either grammatically or whatever else, is usually very difficult to read. Plus, it shows that the student has not devoted a lot of time to it. When you have a good structure, well, let's say you earn some brownie points and it's probably easier to correct your exam. So, short introduction, first argument, second argument, third argument, and the conclusion. The most important thing here is that the essay needs to be short, that you need to have different arguments from different points of view. So, a point of view would be that the Treaty of Versailles was fair for the winning countries because of whatever you want to mention. Another point of view could be that it wasn't fair in Germany because it was too harsh on them. And you can, of course, argument that and support that point of view with facts and how the Germans reacted and so on and so forth. And with those two arguments, maybe, with those two ideas, you can already conclude something. But I would say it's a bit too short. Even though it needs to be short, just try to create a certain balance. Maybe you cannot. Maybe there are just two arguments, 2 points of view, and that's it. If that's the case, describe those 2 points of view, explain those 2 points of view, give all the information that you can to support it, and conclude. But if you can create a balance leaning on what side, slightly leaning on one side, maybe it's better. Maybe you have more arguments to say that the treaty was fair, and your conclusion can lean on that, and then you would slightly agree with that statement, and that needs to be written on your conclusion. Or maybe let's say you have more arguments in favor of the fact that the treaty of Versailles was not fair, and your answer leans slightly on that conclusion, and you say that maybe that statement is not as true as it should be. Anyway, whether you write more arguments in favor of one or the other, regardless of that, because it depends absolutely on you, there's no correct answer here. You can either say that you agree with this statement or that you disagree, but never strongly, okay? So, as long as both arguments are described, as long as you have created that balance, and you have structured your answer correctly, you go to the conclusion. And on the conclusion, you're going to show that point of view, not before, not on the introduction, not on the arguments, okay? That is basically scientific. So on the conclusion, you can add your opinion. It's usually better if we hide the I think or I believe, because it's a bit informal for an essay. But there are several ways of writing your opinion without saying I believe or I think. I'm probably going to make a video on that later on. So you conclude, and that's it. That is as far as you go. So short essay, no strong opinion, just create a balance. Remember to explain your arguments and to give details for them. And good luck.